はい、切り替えが行われてますけれども、今日は発表がないんですけれども、先日開かれた Rails カンファレンスでマグレブという新しい Ruby 処理系の発表がありました。で、アビ・ブライアントっていう、もともと C サイドを作ってた人が発表したんですけれども、ジェムストーンっていう名前のスモールトークベンダーがありまして、で、オブジェクト指向データベースとかも作ってるんですけれども、そこのバーチャルマシンの上に Ruby を乗っけるっていう非常に革新的なプロジェクトだそうです。まだ全然その Ruby が動くとかそういうレベルではないんですけれども、ベンチマークによってはめちゃめちゃ速いというふうなことを言ってました。それも楽しみですね。さて、もうそろそろ始まると思うんですけれども、チャールズ・ナッタのことを紹介しておくとですね、JRuby のメンテナーであることは皆さんご存知だと思いますけれども、彼は名だたるスピード強でしてですね、もし Ruby1.8 がよりも JRuby の方が遅かったら、それはバグとして正式に認定するからレポートしてくれと、常々語っておりますとですね、それぐらいスピード強です。なんか最近ターゲットを Ruby1.9 に変えたらしいので、ちょっと我々ドキドキしてるんですけれども、はい、そろそろ準備ができたんじゃないかというふうに思います。Ready?
Okay. Yes, ready.
はい、ではですね、チャールズ・ナッターによる、レポートです。JRuby について、JRuby が学べるという話ですね。ではよろしくお願いします。チャールズ・ナッターです。
Okay, I am Charles Nutter. I'm going to give you a little intro to JRuby and do some demonstrations. Not lots of technical information. If you have technical questions, just find me or email. In Japanese is okay. Not for me. I'll have someone translate for me. But to make it easy for you. Okay, so a quick intro and then all demonstrations for the most part. Just to keep it interesting. So I am Charles Nutter. I've been doing Java since pretty much it was created. I've been at Sun for actually almost 2 years now, working full-time on JRuby. I've also started working on JVM dynamic language support, using JRuby as research to make other dynamic languages fast on the JVM. And that's going pretty well so far. I've done a lot of other stuff in the past, but so JRuby is just a Ruby implementation that uses the same VM as Java. So it is not Java. You don't have to know Java. It's just Ruby on the JVM. It's actually been around for about 6 years now. Tom and I and the current developers didn't create it, but we took it over, mostly rewrote it. So there's been a lot of changes over the years. We're compatible with 1.8 right now, but we will start working on 1.9 features this summer and hopefully have those all in by fall sometime. There's a few little things that we do, like native threading, which is nice. Lots of libraries, obviously, on the JVM. So I don't have a new release to announce this year because there's one that we're still working on. 1.1.2 was about 2 months ago. Lots of improvements, lots of bugs fixed. This YAML symbol thing, we were evaling to do symbol parsing, which was obviously very slow. So we fixed that. Lots of performance fixes. Gazillions of big decimal issues. So lots of big decimal issues fixed. 1.1.3 we're working on right now. It has a new interpreter. JRuby has both interpreted and compiled execution. The interpreter has not had a lot of work, so we improved it. It's about 30% faster now. Lots of improvements for compiled performance. Lots of other little things. You can try it out, and when we have the announcement, all of the information will be there. So where are people using JRuby today? Well, there's 4 areas that I wanted to show. The tooling area will just kind of happen along the way because I'll be using NetBeans to show some things. But JRuby's parser is used for NetBeans and for all of the Eclipse-based IDEs. And I think a couple others use our stuff. Swing development is a newer one for doing GUI development across platforms. Lots of people are using JRuby with Swing. because it works pretty nicely. I'll show that. Recently, people have been doing graphics and games work in JRuby using Java graphics and games libraries, and I think we'll see there'll be more of those. I have a demo of one thing. And then, of course, Rails that people are using JRuby for. So as far as tooling goes, there's no specific demo, you'll just see it, but NetBeans seems to be one of the better IDEs now for IDE features. The others are catching up, but we're continuing to work on NetBeans to make it as good as possible. So, swing programming. The swing API in Java is very powerful, but too complex for humans to use, in my opinion. Ruby makes it much easier, much more fun. Actually seems to be giving swing a new life by using it in JRuby. The other advantages with swing over a C or a native toolkit is you can package up one application. It will run anywhere you have JRuby and the JVM. No, don't have to rebuild it, don't have to make sure libraries are present, it just works everywhere. So there are 3 options for swing development right now. There's Cherry, which is a builder-like library. Profligacy, which is created by Zed Shaw. It has no builder syntax, but it tries to solve some of the harder problems of swing, specifically creating layouts and binding events to different components. But the one I think most people will use is called Monkey Bars. Monkey Bars expects you will use a GUI tool to build your user interface and then create a controller backend for it, rather than doing all of the coding yourself. So I'll show you a little what this looks like. Now first, how many people have seen the little JRuby Swing IRB demo? There's probably a few people that have. I'll wait for translation, we'll get there. But I'm going to show it anyway, because it's kind of fun. So this is just going to be running IRB in JRuby, using JIRB. And because we're in JRuby, we have access to all of the Java components. So we can pull in, I'll require Java, but actually the signal handling for IRB has already done this. We can import all the classes that we need, JavaX, Swing, JFrame, a button. And then we can use these components just like we would any piece of Ruby code. Okay. Oh, I'm running with X. Well, that's no problem. Okay, so f.show, and there we have our little window. f.size. Let's see. Okay, it's bigger. And actually, I did that wrong. All right, well, you get the idea. Always on top. Equals true. Okay, it's probably an X thing. Oh, it is an X thing. All right, so we've got our window. It doesn't do anything yet, though. We'll throw a button into it quick. Okay, we have a button. And I think this was maybe new since last year. To add an event handler to the button, we can do add action listener and just give it a block and then set the text to something else. Make sure I got it all typed in here. Again. Okay, and if everything works, there. So that's very easy. Very easy to use Java components. But I don't think anyone should ever have to write to the Swing API directly. You will almost always want to use a layout tool, such as this. This is Matisse which is built into NetBeans, probably one of the nicest swing layout components that's available. And this is basically just a little Twitter client that some folks wrote for Java 1 demonstration. And you can move stuff around, and you get all the nice boundaries and snapping grid and everything else. So you only ever write your frame using this, and then you would wire it in with this little controller in the back end. So for the action performed on the login button, here's the behavior that you would have. For action performed on username text, you would do this. So basically makes it much simpler. Here's the model, there's not much to it. But essentially, these three pieces comprise all of the behavior for the login dialog. And now if I run this, we'll see if this actually comes up here. Oh, no, it didn't build correctly. Let's see. We'll do a clean and build. One other nice thing about monkey bars that they've added in, if you take a look under the files that it has, there is the jar-based version, which you can run on any JVM, but it also can create platform-specific ones. So a Mac app that uses the OS X's Java support, or an executable that uses Windows JVM. I'll try running one more time here. No, it's not set up right. Well, you get the idea on that one. I'll move on to the more entertaining demo anyway. So monkey bars is a very simple way to actually do all of your GUI development. Since it's running on top of JRuby, you can use all of the libraries that you're used to. So back to slides here. Okay, so the graphics stuff was a big surprise to us that people would want to do this in JRuby. But once we saw the code and we saw some of the demos they were doing, we realized this was actually a lot of fun. And I've heard about people playing with this stuff for hours on end now. Processing is a library for the JVM that does accelerated 2D graphics, 2D and 3D graphics, but 2D stuff is kind of the coolest part of it. It accelerates with OpenGL. It has a whole set of components that you can build. But wrapping it with Ruby makes it a lot easier to use, a lot more entertaining, and it also gives us some great demos for talks like this. So actually, I'll just start it up first, and then I'll show you the code that comes afterwards. So this is an app called A Face for Stephen Hawking by Jeremy Ashkenazi, who created the Ruby processing library. So this is full screen OpenGL, and this will run pretty much on any JVM, since they all have support for hooking in the Joggle Java OpenGL library. There's a flocking algorithm here. There is some audio processing that's going on, so it can detect sound, and it also detects frequencies. But this is all just using the existing libraries you have on Java. And all of the flocking logic, updating these globes, pulsing, all of this is written in Ruby. I'll show you what the code looks like. So if we go over here, A Face for Stephen Hawking, we see it pulls in some libraries. He's created some utility functions in the processing, but pulls in Boids, which is the flocking algorithm. This Angela is for doing the audio processing, pulls in OpenGL, the processing stuff. And then essentially that's all you have to do to get the libraries in place and extend this processing app. And then we set up our application, set up our window. We want to use OpenGL. I think this makes it full screen accelerated. We want to do smoothing, other things, shininess, specular highlights. And then we build the actual model. So we have a flock. We have various particles in the flock. We do some audio stuff. We do some beat detection based on the audio library. And here in the draw, you see every time it's requested to draw, it updates each particle based on the flocking algorithms and other things, and then re-renders. Here's the sound sampling. It's getting the left amplifier and getting the frequency, getting the amplitude, and using that to determine the next color, next shape, and the pulsing for the graphics. So all pretty simple, and really this one file, only about 130 lines of code, Since it uses all these different Java libraries, this is essentially all that you would need to write to create this application. I think that's pretty fun. There's a couple other demos that if we have time later I can show some of the other Ruby processing stuff. So I'll go back to the slides. Okay. So web applications are the one area we thought probably most people would be interested in as far as JRuby goes. There's been a major change in Java web development over the past few years. Most of the Java web frameworks are just too complicated, too configurable. They're finally starting to follow Rails' lead, but there's still a long way to go. Being able to run Rails on the JVM means any organization that has a Java server, any organization that has Java installed, can start doing Rails development without changing anything. And that's very powerful. If you've ever tried to introduce new technologies into a large organization, it's nearly impossible. But you can get Ruby in and Rails through the back door by running on top of JRuby. We also have a lot of options for deployment. Deployment issues have basically been solved on the JVM. And JRuby has potential to be a lot faster, even than it is today. So the old way, using Mongrel, it's kind of funny when I see how people have problems managing and scaling all of these processes. Because this has essentially been solved a long time ago on the JVM by being able to deploy in one process. So with Mongrel, you have so many applications times the number of concurrent requests you want to have. You need to monitor all of those processes, make sure that they don't run off and take a bunch of CPU or take a lot of memory. It's just too complicated. It's not something you should have to do. It's painful because it's the wrong way to do this kind of deployment. Mongrel works in JRuby, but it's not typically what we'd expect people would use. So Fusion, the Fusion guys with their passenger plugin to Apache have solved some of this. They've solved a lot of the management. They've reduced some of the memory. It's pretty easy to configure it and deploy it. But they still have to fork off separate processes to manage these things. So you still have some of the issues of monitoring all of those different instances of Ruby. So there's a couple options on JRuby. The first is the classic model, deploying to a Java app server as a WAR file, a web application. And you can run all of your applications, as many requests as you want, multiple database connections, usually pooled, so that you're not hitting the database too hard, all in one process with this. And you can share data across those, share caches, other things. Makes it a lot simpler. And the deployment process is actually pretty simple too. So here is this is really the only setup for GlassFish as an application server, just as an example. Other than the download, about 3 steps to have a production server installed and running, which is pretty good. So I'll do a little demonstration of deploying an application to GlassFish now. Let's see if I can just, all right. I'll fix this. Okay, so I'm going to go pull my JRuby environment in. And we'll go back into RubyKaigi directory. So I'm just going to create a little application with JRuby. This will do almost nothing. Same commands that you would use for Rails development with regular Ruby. They all work just the same under JRuby. What did I miss? Oops. Okay. So I'll create my little test app, hooking up to MySQL. And I could run this, and it would run in Mongrel, but it's not particularly exciting. So if you want to make a WAR file to deploy on an app server, all you need to do is install this gem, Warbler. I don't know if everybody's heard of this yet. Pretty cool. It runs in JRuby or regular Ruby, but it packages your Rails app up as a deployable archive. And I've already got it installed, so all I actually need to do to turn this into a WAR file is to run the warble command. What warble will do is pull in the application code, pull in all of the Rails libraries, pull in Ruby standard library. It comes with a version of JRuby built in, so you don't have to even go download JRuby to just try it. And out comes a WAR file that is essentially the whole Rails app ready for deploying on a Java app server. Now, if I deploy this to the server I have GlassFish running here. All right, so run the deploy command against my WAR file. This will take a few seconds, unpack everything into the GlassFish directory, and now it's deployed. And that's essentially it. This is production Rails now, done. You can hook it up behind Apache or whatever else, but it's essentially it. I didn't mean to cut off here. Applause there. So let's take a look, just make sure it works. Make sure I'm not tricking anybody. 8080 is the default for GlassFish. Oh, wait. Oh, that's odd. Make sure the server's still working here. Okay. Oh, well, that's great. The demo gods are against me today. Oh, you know what? It's called RubyKaigi.war because I deployed the wrong file. We'll go into the app this time, and we'll warble it again. See, Warbler's so great, it'll turn anything into a WAR file, even if it's not an app. Let's try this again here. Okay, so I'll deploy that file now. Deploy test app. Okay, I thought I killed Twitterific. Whatever. All right, so back this, deploy test app, back to the browser, and there it is. Okay. So that works, and this will scale as high as you want. There is a configuration file you can create, warble config, and this will let you change all of the default settings. Let's see if I can, I'll just bring it up here. Warble.rb. Now you look at this, and if there's additional directories you need to include, just add them here. If there's additional Java libraries, just give the path from application root. If you need additional gems or specific versions of gems, you add those here. And then actually one of the more interesting things here, if you look at these lines, Warbler also supports any rack-based application, which means with the same commands and the same library, you can deploy a MERB application the same way. And MERB applications don't actually even need multiple instances. So it's really powerful inside JRuby and the JVM because native threaded, runs great. Here for Rails, you can specify the minimum and maximum number of JRuby instances that you want to have. So now this is all fun, and this is great if you have an app server, but there's one more way I wanted to show quickly for doing Rails deployment. Well, here's the scaling of actually running stuff in GlassFish. This is with one runtime deployed to GlassFish, and this is comparing with CRuby 1.8, 1.8.6, something or other, under Webrick and Mongrel. You see, Mongrel gives a little bit of a boost as far as scaling up. Along the bottom is concurrent requests hitting the server, and the reply rate is on the vertical axis. And so it ends up scaling pretty high, and I think this may actually have saturated Nick Seeger's machine when he was running it, which is why it tops off here. But it doesn't tail off, it doesn't collapse like Mongrel does under load. And wait, there's one more here. So the other one, this is when you have 3 runtimes. 3 runtimes in JRuby versus 1 runtime in JRuby, and you do get a nice linear scaling by having more of those runtimes, and it's able to respond a lot more rapidly. So now this is cool, but the GlassFish Gem is what I'm really excited about. GlassFish Gem, as a gem, is essentially all of the deployment and app server magic in one file. You can gem install it right now. It's kind of development quality, but we're looking for bug reports and feature requests. You install this, and you get a GlassFish Rails command. And the whole gem is only about 2 to 3 megabytes. So it's not like it's a whole 70 meg app server or something. It's just what's needed to run JRuby on Rails. So this gives you the best of both worlds. It's Rails deployment more like you're used to, running a command at the command line, having a process that you can manage. But it's also the agile processes. It's also the it's all of the best of the JVM, since it's running on top of the on top of JRuby. So it gives you all of those things in one little command. And I'll just show you how easy it is to get this started. We'll go back here. So we've got our same app. I've got the GlassFish Gem installed. I will run it on current directory. And I think this it supports multiple apps now, or it will in the future. It's coming along. But you can configure all of that stuff at the command line. You can see it's starting Rails instances here. That means it's actually spinning up the Rails instances that you need to have the application run. And that's it. Now this is also essentially a production server with one command. And if I go and hit this, the default for this is on port 3000. Oops. And it's deployed at root by default, which is what you'd expect from running a command like that. And there it is. So that's one command, 3 meg gem, and you've got a production Rails server. I think it's about as simple as it could possibly get. Okay, I think I only have 1 or 2 more slides. So who's using JRuby on Rails in production? There's a bunch of folks. Here's a few of them that are listed. Oracle's Mix was probably the nicest one for us, a top-level site on Oracle's domain that is actually a JRuby on Rails application for doing customer ideas and social interaction kind of stuff. Sun's using it for a few projects that we have talked about and a few projects that are still coming up. Of course, ThoughtWorks is doing stuff. And then CSI, a collaborative software initiative, is doing a lot of work with the state of Utah for disease surveillance. This is going to be a packaged application that US states can use to monitor infectious disease outbreaks and track them and see what's happening with them. And there's more on the way. We hear more and more from people that are doing JRuby on Rails internally or will be going public with something, but they're not yet. So you're going to see more and more of these applications coming. And so there's a few URLs for NetBeans, GlassFish, the JRuby Wiki. And I think we're ready for any questions. If there's questions out there, just come down to the microphones. Or on IRC. MySpace on Oracle. Yeah, it is kind of like that. It's more like sort of like a dig on Oracle for ideas.
なんかフォローしてない人がいるみたいなので、質問があればですね、前のマイクのところに出てきてくださいということです。日本人はおとなしい。デンマークでも同じことが起きましたけれども。
I'll be here today and tomorrow too, so you can ask me in person if you like.
本当にいない？あ、いたいた。じゃあそっちまで走って、こっちでもいいけど、どっちかに。
Such a big room.
はい、畠山と申します。なんか JRuby のパーサーを作るのはすごい大変だったと思うんですけども、なんか苦労話があったら聞きたいなと。
It should be difficult to implement it.
You want to try?
He was saying that
JRuby のパーサー
it was really hard to implement the parser in JRuby. So would you like to tell us about some of the war stories you had in trying to build the parser?
Well, I refuse to ever write a parser. I will not write parsers. I hate parsers. So there were a few folks early on that rewrote the, what is it, parse.y or YAML or grammar.y, whatever the file is, for a Yak-like parser generator in the JVM called J. I think Mono also uses J. And I don't know any of the war stories for the parser, but judging by the amount of work Tom has to put in to fix bugs in it and to add new features, I think parsing is probably one of the hardest pieces of Ruby to actually re-implement. So we will never be changing our parser.
わかりました。もともと CRuby のパーザーをベースにその J というツールを使って、作りました。すっごい大変だったのでもう二度とやりたくないということだそうです。
Okay, there's a question about object space and binding of caller, and I think they're very neat features, and we can support them, but at least on the JVM and on JRuby, object space, binding of caller, these features will incur an automatic performance penalty because for object space, we have to track all objects manually so that we can walk them. For binding of caller, rather than being able to optimize certain methods so there's no scope or no frame, we would have to do it all the time because it would force all of the methods to prepare for the possibility of binding of caller. So we can support them and they'll work, but they will impact performance. And right now JRuby has an object space implementation, but it's normally disabled since as far as production, most people aren't using object space for production apps. If you need it, you can turn it on.
はい、オブジェクトスコープとスペースとバインディングオブコーラーは実装すると両方ともパフォーマンスに非常に大きなダメージがあるので、デフォルトでオフになってます。でも実装したので、オンにすることもできます。遅いけどだそうです。はい、マイクのところに。
なんか最初の方でなんかブロックの中でのブレイクとかそれのパフォーマンスの向上というのがなんかあってそれが気になったんですけど、多分 JVM だと普通に例外使うという選択くらいしか思い浮かばないですけど、あれどうやってパフォーマンス向上させたのかというのがこうすごく気になるんですけど、
もう一回
最初の方の発表の最初の方でブロックの中でブレイクとか使った場合のそのなんかパフォーマンスの向上っていうのがそのなんかスライドに書いてあったんですけど、その時の Java バーチャルマシン上で、それ実現することを考えると素直にエクセプション投げるくらいしか簡単な方法はなそうなんですけど、それでどうやってパフォーマンスを向上させることができたんだろうなというのが非常に気になるところなんですけど。
So he wants to know, in the first part of your presentation, you discussed performance, and like he wants to know, how you got that done, really. So.
Oh, okay. Well, so the question about JRuby and performance and how we've made it perform well, mostly we have tried to implement Ruby in such a way that the JVM can optimize for us. Make the code as hotspot friendly, as JVM friendly as possible so that it can do all of the optimization. And I had a couple of benchmarks I can show running.
Charles?
Yes.
He's interested in the how to improve the performance of the non-local break and the...
Okay. Okay, I love you, new office. So, well, for non-local break, for example, we implement it using an exception, which gets thrown, so it throws all the way back to the caller. The JVM can take an exception that's thrown in one method and caught in another and optimize that to a jump rather than an exception throw. So that's one example. Most of JRuby Performance is trying to use those tricks in the JVM as well as possible to make things fast. So that's one example of how we do performance.
わかりましたか。JVM は、オプティマイズによって、いくつかの例外処理をジャンプに変換できるので、それができるだけ有効になるように、JRuby を実装しましたというふうなことを言ってました。
ありがとうございます。Thank you.
Yes. So an example of that, the performance that we get out of the JVM, for example, I think I have some in here.
Okay. 終わりというのをスタッフが出してくれてるんですけど、チャールズには読めないので、It's about time.
Okay. This will take only a few seconds. Okay, so here's running a fractal benchmark with the server VM, running it once. The Java server
計算ですけれ
VM,
ども、こんな感じです。結構早く動いてますっていう。
the Java server VM does better if it can run longer. So if we say run this 5 times, So that was 4.3 seconds. The first one will come out about the same, 4.5 something, 3.7.
で、サーバー VM はですね、より
And you can see it
強
speeds
力に
up.
オプティマイズをするので、5回連続で実行させるとですね、5倍の時間ではなくて、
So.
もっと短い時間で。
All right, so that's my time. Thank you. Ask any questions later, and thanks very much for having me here. One more question? Oh, yes.
もう一つだけ質問したい。
JRuby の日本語サポートとか国際化についてちょっとせっかくなのでメッセージがあればよろしくお願いします。
Do you have any specific the message about the multilingualization on JRuby?
Right. Well, we want to support both Ruby 1.8 and 1.9 features exactly as they are on CRuby. And we have not started multilingualization yet, but we are going to this very soon. We've been waiting for it to be finalized. So we're going to start probably this summer. And then Japanese support and Unicode support and everything should come out of that.
はい。
Alright.
まあ多分 JRuby だとインターナルコードはユニコードなのだけは避けられないと思いますけど、はい。もう一人だけ質問したいと言っているので、じゃあ彼も。
すみません。JRuby の開発者として Ruby1.9 はどのように評価されているかということを教えていただきたいんですが。
As a JRuby implementer, how do you evaluate 1.9?
What do I think of 1.9, basically?
Yes.
I think 1.9 has fixed a lot of things that probably needed to be fixed in Ruby. I see 1.9 as still somewhat experimental. I'm looking forward to 1.9.1 to finalize everything. We've waited to do 1.9 features largely because things were still changing on a week-to-week basis. So I'm looking forward to 1.9.1, and we'll try and have JRuby support. See, I'll show you this. See, look here at the bottom. And we have some things here already, like so, I mean, some things are there. No, I turned off. That should fail. Yeah. So, but you can choose 1.8 or 1.9, and we will support all the features that 1.9 has by the end of the year, maybe.
はい、どうもありがとうございました。チャールズに拍手を。